Welcome, guys, from sunny Austin, Texas.
Where we have traveled from cloudy and cold Pennsylvania.
Well, I think it's important to mention Austin because it seems to be the city that's on everyone's mind right now. People are talking about it. People are moving here. But I don't want to talk about it too much because if everyone moves here, it'll be lame, which is kind of a problem.
Yep.
And a lot of people are moving here from
San Francisco.
San Francisco. And we both lived in San Francisco for a while, and I wanted to talk with you guys about San Francisco. So, what do you think?
Should we give a bit of our history with San Francisco?
Yeah, I
first?
feel like getting out of San Francisco is like getting out of abusive relationships. So, like, you need to talk about your history with the city, like, how
Yeah.
you got in it, what
Yeah.
it did to you, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's true.
I guess Julie should start because she went first and
Yeah.
I followed her.
I went first. I graduated from college and spent a year in Pennsylvania, but was like dying for something new, and applied for a job that was in Redwood City, California, and I had no idea what that was. And they called me back and they wanted to hire me, so I had to look up where it was, and it was near San Francisco. I couldn't believe it, and I was so excited. So I moved there, and in late 2013, like December 2013. December 2014.
No,
No,
2013.
2013. Okay. And I did live in Redwood City for a while, which is on the peninsula, and then I moved up to San Francisco like 6 months later.
And meanwhile, we were separated. This is the only time we have been separated as twins in our entire life. I was living in Washington, D.C., well, Arlington, Virginia, but I always just say Washington, D.C. And she would call me from San Francisco and was having a great time, and you were doing all these fun things.
You came to
and-
visit.
Yeah, and I would visit her, and I was like, this place is way more fun than Washington, D.C., where everyone's very stuffy and political. So she was there for 3 years, and then I followed her out in 2016.
Well, and yeah, and like there's so much to love about that city, right? So it's absolutely, I've never been anywhere more beautiful in my life. Anybody who tells you that there's a more beautiful city in the United States is lying.
It's true.
And there are the asterisk caveats to this, which are related to the social situation.
We'll get
there.
to all
Should we do the pros
asterisks.
first?
Yeah, pros for
So what makes it beautiful? We can talk about that. The architecture there is exquisite. It's all these 1800s Victorians with like gilding, like all these like gold glittery edges, beautiful lollipop colors, magical creamsicle sunsets.
Yeah, the sky's like pastel
All the time.
all the time, and
The
it's
water
sunny.
is clear blue with like peaking mountains coming out of it and like luscious green hills.
It's like somebody described it to
rocks.
me once as it's like living inside a painting. Like it's just beautiful.
There's
right?
sailboats on the water. Like
It's stunning. Mountains, mountain cliff sides, beaches, stunning architecture. Walking around is like walking in an open air art museum. Like
lots of beautiful murals and street art that is like tasteful, not just like scribbled graffiti, like actual artists making art on the streets because it's sunny there all year round, so you can work outside all the time.
And at the time, we were coming from a lifetime in Pennsylvania, and we're very creative people. And we had never been surrounded by so many other creative people who like valued art, and that was top of mind. And performers, we like to perform. We're fire dancers. Well, we became fire dancers there, but we always liked to perform and had that streak. And people in San Francisco are very performative, and there's like a culture of costuming, like people dress up for the street festivals and like are always making things and performing and just really expressing themselves with visual arts.
It's a highly whimsical and fantastical place. Like the culture itself is very whimsical and ethereal.
Yeah.
And circusy almost, which is fun for us because we're kind of circus girls. We ride a unicycle and fire dance. So
Which we learned there. So living
Yeah.
there, we get into start to immerse in the culture. It happens like slowly at first, but the culture there really starts to shape you.
well, my experience was different than yours. I moved there from DC and immediately was like, this place is full of communists. And I was like very put off by how like anti-American values most of the people there were that I was meeting. After coming from DC, where there's liberals, conservatives, libertarians, all walks of the political spectrum live in DC. But in California, I didn't really realize and this is just being naive and young, I didn't realize I was moving to such a deep blue place. It was so deeply liberal and was the most liberal place I'd ever lived, probably besides Penn State. So I immediately was kind of like, did I make a mistake? I don't know if I expressed that to you, but that's what happened with me.
Yeah.
But for you, it was a little different because you moved there, I think, as more of a like left
I
libertarian.
was on the left, yeah, and I was a libertarian and a feminist at the time.
Yeah.
Two badges I no longer wear.
So you were a professional leftist, and
I was, yeah. I moved there to work as a professional leftist or progressive activist. Like, people don't understand that you can get paid to do this, but you can. And I was working for an online petition site.
there's like Soros money, there's
Yeah.
Zuckerberg money, there's
Yeah.
Gates money, there's Ford money, there's lots of money to just support progressive causes as a full-time job.
Right. And we would like plan protests that we were like getting paid to attend.
Paid protests.
Yeah. And so that was my job, being like sort of a professional activist. And it was through the experience of living in San Francisco over time I started to realize a lot of the ideals and things I believed were playing out in reality in San Francisco, in its culture and in its policy. And looking at the empirical evidence of how that plays out in reality started to really shift things for me. We could dig into different aspects of that.
Well, so we were listening to Vanessa Carlton's San Francisco on the way here, and it's a very nostalgic song. It's easy to be nostalgic for San Francisco. It's just so beautiful. Like, I was there myself for. I arrived in the Bay Area in 2010, and moved up to San Francisco in 2013, and was there through like 2019. I think that's roughly right. So I was in the Bay Area for 8 or 9 years, San Francisco much of that time. And yeah, it was so, there's just moods. I can remember very distinctly certain streets that I would drive through or walk through or bike through, and how the trees looked and how the hills looked, and like the certain moods that come from being in certain places there. And it feels like a dream, like remembering that time, or a trip, if you will. And she has this line in the song that I picked up on where she talks about happily ever after in San Francisco, and that doesn't happen. Like, there's something very, if I was to describe San Francisco, it'd be a dream with like a dark edge, or it would be like something beautiful with an incurable rot in it. So it has like this very bittersweet sort of taste to it, where you know that it's not building towards the future, you know it's not sustainable, you know that it doesn't have values which will allow you to grow old there and leave something behind.
Yeah, it's kind of always. I always felt like I was always in an earth. I used to say the ground never stops shaking in San Francisco because it's so unstable. Like, you always are having the back of your head, like, how long can this last? Like, you can't stay there.
Yeah. And there's a lot of factors as to why that is. Like, one of it is obviously the absolutely insane housing market. You have to make a lot of money to like even secure your own lease in San Francisco, which I never made enough money to do that. And I was making good money, and I didn't make enough that landlords wanted to see to just get my own lease. So I was always having to kind of find people who already had a lease and had a room open. And so that sets up really crazy relationship dynamics where the person who has the lease to the apartment has like a lot of power over you. And there's like, it really screws up your relationships in your like home life and who you're living with. You're often living with random people that you met on Craigslist.
It creates a dynamic where it's really easy to rip people off because you have the landlord and then you have like a sub landlord, and that is the tenant that holds the lease. So they're the master leaseholder, and they have a kind of, I don't know, it's a very like non like legal like written place. So you just need a room so badly. You don't really do a lot of paperwork before you move in somewhere. It's very easy to hide the fact that there's a true cost to the apartment and just tell people that it's more expensive than it is and pocket the extra money. I lived with a man who wasn't working because he was a master leaseholder, and he just ripped off all the tenants that were living there and pocketed like, an extra $2,200 a month from the people that were living there. So, and that's a horrible community dynamic. Like, you can't trust your literal neighbor. It makes love your neighbor very hard.
Like, the person living in the room next to you might be like ripping you off by hiding the actual cost of the apartment.
Right.
So I have a question for you. San Francisco is probably the most feminist city in the world, or at least in America. How would you say it treats women?
Terribly.
I I never felt more unsafe than when I lived in San
Terribly.
Francisco.
And there, right. And
As a
there's-
woman.
Right. And there's multiple reasons for that, right? Like one is because like you're getting into relationships with men where like a lot of them are like into polyamory or open relationships. They don't even want to like commit to you. And they have no concept of what masculine duty is to a woman, which is to protect and provide. But the feminist dynamic is like, well, men no longer have to provide because women should be able to just make their own money and provide for themselves. And then they also don't have in their mind that they need to protect you because you're an independent woman and you can handle everything on your own. And so then the relationship sort of just they become about like hedonistic pleasure and having fun and these sort of like adult duties and responsibilities that are inherent as a product of our like gender roles and the different physicality of men and women are just kind of eradicated. So dating there was crazy because men often just, they didn't really want to take responsibility for a woman. They just wanted to have fun and play.
It's very exploitative.
Yeah. And then, I could talk at length about the culture of polyamory and how toxic that is and how
normal it
we
is
need
there.
to make sure that doesn't spread to other cities because it's a really bad culture and very attractive to young people who are getting a lot of messages about why traditional modes of being in relationships are bad when they're not, and there are very real biological reasons for them. So that's one reason. But then on top of that, you have so your relationships are kind of not great, and then on top of that, you have city policies that are very left wing, where like, I mean, if we think about enforcing civil order, right? Like, okay, are people allowed to sleep on the sidewalk, do drugs on the sidewalk in the open air in the broad daylight? Are they allowed to defecate on the sidewalk? Are they allowed to pee on the stop signs? Are they allowed to pitch a tent outside of your apartment or your office building?
Are they allowed to steal from you?
Are they allowed to smash your window and steal from you? All of that is allowed because the feminist ethos of the city is all about compassion. And so criminals or people who are homeless or vagrants or whatever, we just have to have compassion for them. And
they don't
and
even call people criminals. They've even changed the word. They call you a law-involved person because it's softer.
Yeah. So there's this sort of idea that things have happened in their life that have led to trauma, and that's why they're acting this way, and we just need to care for them and be empathetic, and that's kind of the like archetypal feminine is to be compassionate, right? But all societies need feminine and masculine energy, and the masculine energy, the like dad energy, is to say, no, you can't do that. We're not tolerating that behavior. That's not allowed here. You need to shape up and stop. But there's none of that masculine energy in San Francisco. So the police, and I think the police there are good people, but they're tied by the feminist city policies that don't allow them to say, no, get your butt off the street, like you're not allowed to do this, and we're going to like clean up the streets. And the streets there are, it is almost indescribable how unsafe, dirty, and like third world the streets of San Francisco are. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen videos and things on Twitter, but like the reality of it is really not presented by the media. It's getting a little bit better. I know that like Tucker Carlson had a segment on it. But like the reality of how dirty and unsafe the streets are is just terrible.
Well, I guess the takeaway is that if you don't have that dad energy, then that's protecting people from crime. Like the people who are going to suffer most are women.
Yeah.
Like the masculine energy in society, like its role is to protect the vulnerable, which a lot of times are women who tend to be more vulnerable.
Right. And so like I told this story once on a podcast, but like I was like walking down the street with my boyfriend at the time, and we were walking through a homeless encampment where a lot of people were doing drugs and acting crazy. And I mean, you'll see people with like tattered clothes, like blood on their faces. Like these are people that are really down and out. And we were walking through a block just full of people like this. I felt very unsafe. And my boyfriend at the time just walked straight ahead of me. Like he hurried on through the crowd and like left me behind him. And later I was like, you should have like pulled me closer and like kept me safe next to you. Like, why did you run ahead of me? Like, because he just didn't have that awareness that
he's a feminist.
Yeah, like,
you should be able to take care of yourself.
You should be able to take care of yourself.
I don't need to protect you.
And I don't need to
You're a
protect
badass,
you.
right? I can't even tell you how many people in San Francisco told me you're a badass, and I was like, I don't want to be a badass. Like they meant I could like protect myself physically, and it's like.
Like no,
what
like,
if I don't want to?
physically,
I can't. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're 5 5'3",
yeah,
and
115 pounds.
yeah, and I mean, I could pick you up very easily and just run off with you.
Yeah.
And you need protection from big, crazy men of my size.
Yeah, like whether that's the police or the men you're in a relationship with, there's always going to be bad people in society, people who are misbehaving. Like that's, and we can talk about why that is and how to prevent them. That's the conversation the left wants to have. Fine, but we also need to start with the baseline of like this is the reality, and what do we do while that is the reality? Like how do we protect women while there are going to be bad criminals?
I want to give Amy a little airtime. What was it like for
Sorry,
you
I just am
as a
laughing
woman?
thinking about like the notion of like filling a city with like drug addicted criminals and then also filling it with feminists. Like it's just a perfect storm. It's truly, I shouldn't maybe be laughing, but it is kind of comical. Like, who thought this was a good idea?
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, what was your experience like as a woman living in San Francisco?
Oh, I felt very unsafe all the time walking down the street. I had one boyfriend when I lived there, and I felt safer when, and he was like kind of an Orange County, like, not quite the San Francisco culture. He wasn't a feminist. He's kind of an Orange County, more conservative guy. So like I felt safe when I was with him. But anytime I wasn't walking down the street, it's extremely, extremely sketchy. And yeah, I don't know. You pretty much covered all of it. Like I had a little better time, I think, dating there than you did. But it was pretty rough.
Well, I know from my experience, like myself and many of my friends, almost all my friends have been the victim of crime while we were living there. And I always felt it made me very bitter and a little resentful of the dominant politics there because it's full of compassion, and it'll pick out certain incidents of like someone using the wrong word towards a person and like whip up a media firestorm of compassion against like whoever I don't know, was ethnically insensitive or misgendered someone or something like that. But meanwhile, like, assault, sexual assault, robbery, violence, having parks that are so polluted with needles, like kids can't play in it, like all that is fine. Like we're not talking about that. That's not the cause of the day. But we need to signal our support for causes far and near that like why doesn't it matter? Why doesn't it matter that like my car was broken into twice? Why doesn't it matter that my girlfriend was sexually assaulted on the street? Why doesn't it matter that like one of my female friends was punched in the stomach and had her iPad taken at a bus stop? Why doesn't it matter that so many of us were followed by vagrants shouting that they were going to kill us and nobody could do anything? Like, why doesn't that matter? Why doesn't that matter?
I don't know.
I started to realize this because whenever I was living there, I was working in the media, and I was a professional progressive activist, and I was the PR representative, so I was working with reporters. And I started to notice exactly what you're talking about, where like the things we were always so focused on weren't the real issues that needed to be addressed for us all to live healthy, safe, prosperous lives. And I know Jordan Peterson talks about how sin is missing the mark, and it felt like it was we were constantly missing the mark of what we needed to focus on, or like what the real issue was, right? Like a good example, which you could talk about more, is drug policy in that city, right? And how, and like the safe injection sites, and
Right.
you should talk a little bit about like the mentality of how to address drug addiction.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the mentality, okay, maybe I should. We had a roommate in college who struggled with a heroin addiction, and we talked to her about going to rehab, and she did, and she got clean. She had to leave the area she was in to get out of the environment that was kind of enabling her. But I would never have given her clean needles. Like, so I just kind of had that experience, and then to move to a city where a lot of people were pro, like giving people, oh, well, if they can just do heroin more cleanly, it'll help them and it'll lead them out of the addiction. I just find that completely nonsensical and actually enabling. You're actually making it easier for people to carry on their addiction instead of setting some boundaries for them. And I would get into arguments with my coworkers about this. They thought I was extremely uncompassionate. They accused me of wanting people to die. And I just found that so inverted. Like, actually, I don't want people to overdose and die. I'm trying to think of ways to get them off the drugs that are hurting them. But you want to just make it like a softer landing on the bottom or something. And yeah, I really disagreed with these safe injection sites that were popular idea in San Francisco. And the idea was that you get clean heroin needles and a safe space to do hard drugs. And then, but we'll also have some pamphlets here about rehab programs, and maybe you'll be interested in that. But I don't think it's a good idea at all.
Which one's more interesting, like doing more drugs or reading a pamphlet? I
and
don't
hearing
know. Like, which one do I want? The needle full of heroin or the pamphlet? I'm gonna read the pamphlet.
Well, and then the streets of San Francisco were just covered in city-provided needles. They were everywhere because they had these drop boxes for them that nobody used.
Yeah, you're supposed to get the clean needle and then
discard
return it. And no one returned it. These people are strung out
all over the streets. But it just kind of goes in line with like the mentality of that city where it's imbalanced, right? Like, yes, we do need compassion for people who are struggling, ways for people to address root trauma and things like that. But we would also notice that no one was interested in having the conversation of like, okay, so what has gone wrong in someone's life that they might end up in this place of drug addiction, right? And we kind of tunneled that back towards like the family, right? Where do we all come from? Our families, and what do those families look like? Like, what are the roles that the mother and father play in shaping us and making us feel cared for and nurtured, but also people who grow into beings who have like appropriate boundaries and are able to navigate the difficulties of life, right? But nobody wanted to talk about that or about like fatherlessness being like a root cause of drug addiction
or poor boundaries, lack of boundaries, ability to say no. I met a woman online who told us that her drug addiction had never been worse than when she lived in San Francisco because there were so many opportunities to do drugs and the city is so soft on drug use. And she had to move back to where she was from. She moved there to try to get help because she had heard that you could get help for your problems there. But instead, she just spiraled deeper into her addiction because they enabled it. Yeah. And they have a point, like, when they say that a lot of people who have addictions and things are hurting, they are traumatized, they have childhood trauma, but they don't have any, they're not pulling in like the tough love, right? Because like tough love would tell you no. And it's just like, oh, okay, honey, sure, like whatever you want. Like
it's again like the absence of the masculine. And,
right.
and I think there's been a triumph of libertarianism in the moral realm. Like in San Francisco, and this embarrasses me as someone who was a libertarian in the early 2000s. I was fighting for like, why should we have any rules as long as you're not hurting anyone else? And that's sort of the principle by which relationships are run in San Francisco. Like that's the principle behind polyamory and open relationships and relationship anarchy and all these other things that people do. And it's also the principle behind like very liberal standards of drug use, right? It's like as long as you're like sovereign over your body, we're not going to judge you no matter what you do. But that removes any sort of standard or pressure to be better. Right? That removes any sort of ideal that people can strive for. And so it says to someone that's struggling on the streets, that's fine as long as you chose it. And it doesn't help them to choose better. It doesn't acknowledge that there's any better or worse way to be a human. And that's really crippling for someone that's struggling with their autonomy and struggling with drug use. And I think of in Austin, there's actually a model that's the polar opposite. Here we have the Community First Village, which was started by some Catholics. It's an explicitly religious recovery place for people trying to get off the streets. And it's a village of tiny homes. And they have standards for people. Like to get there, you have to be off drugs. And you have to be trying to better your life. You have to contribute to the community. And it's like the opposite of leaving people on the streets and saying, you do what you want. And with Community First, you see people sometimes turning their life around and regaining some of their autonomy, regaining some of their personal sovereignty. And is that bad?
No. Sounds like a way better model.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing is the idea of freedom as the highest value, which is absolutely the cultural standard in San Francisco.
Freedom is a value.
It's a value, but yeah, when you make it the highest value, then I think the idea is that people think that freedom is that which is like untethered by any constraint, But in reality, placing some constraints on ourselves actually fosters more freedom. And it kind of a paradox, right? But like,
Yeah, I use this analogy of a house a lot. Like, I'm actually freer within the walls of my house to express myself and like have the relationships I want to have within the walls of my house than I am in the middle of the street. And
Right.
it's very paradoxical, but yeah, like you're saying, like good, strong boundaries actually give you more freedom. And I don't know, completely unbridled freedom is actually a prison of itself, also paradoxically.
Yeah, yep.
Like then you become like chained to your base desires and like your worst ways of being because there's no check on them. There's no standard where you bump up against like maybe this isn't the best way for me to live. So
Right. And that all comes out as well in the millennial culture in San Francisco. So a lot of people know that San Francisco is filled with millennials. There's no children. It's not that there's no children, but there's like very few children. You don't see a lot of children. There's more dogs than children in San Francisco. So you just have this.
And even if you look at who's having children, I think most of the children tend to be among. It seems like most of the children I saw were among the poor in San Francisco rather than
Yeah.
people with money. Like people in the middle class, like they're sort of in this awkward place where they're clinging to having their own room and all the money it costs to do that. And
It's not set up like the housing market plays into this, right? No one has enough space to like have their own family, right? So then you get kind of like trapped in this way of living, and the culture there is very focused on like. I mean, there are good things about the culture there amongst the millennials. People are very fit. They really like to be outdoors. They like to go hiking and camping and rock climbing. And there's that, which is great. And that's in part just because California is so beautiful. But then there's also this culture of like partying and just hedonism and just like
kind of only selfishness, like only regard for, like you said, like yourself. Well, as long as I'm not hurting anyone, which is also such a funny metric because hurt is such a gray area. Like it's not like they actually, it's like a very binary thing, like to hurt somebody else. But it, you know, in like the metaphysical sense, that's a lot more harder to draw a line on. Like when you've hurt somebody else, like you can hurt your society through your individual actions.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like when you are not making anything of yourself because you're a 45-year-old that's still going to parties and doing drugs and trying to hook up with girls, and you're not creating offspring that you are raising with virtue to pass on to the next generation, or you're just kind of living to consume the San Francisco party experience. You never stop doing that. Like I think you haven't directly hurt society, but maybe you indirectly have by not being the person you could be.
yeah, you haven't manifested a lot of like good, virtuous potential, right? Like since you're spending all your time over here, there's a whole reality. There's like a gap in reality that you're not manifesting that like isn't filled up because you're goofing off.
And there's something weird with like, yeah, time in San Francisco. Just it feels very like people aren't really thinking super long term because you can't afford to, because like you're never gonna be able to own a house. Like you're never gonna like get out of the situation where you have like I had like 5 roommates in San Francisco.
You
like,
hit
all living-
you hit a ceiling
Yeah,
really quickly.
and then you can't like that the space that normal people have in other cities to like grow and like change and grow up really and take on different responsibilities just like isn't really available there. So then you get kind of stagnant. So it really is Neverland. Like it's a really great place to play.
It's a great playground, but I think the weather plays into this too. It has one of the oddest climates in the world. Like it's Mediterranean, but it's pretty much consistent the whole year. It doesn't change that much. So when you live there, you don't really remember when things happened. Like I couldn't differentiate April from September.
It's always the same outside.
Yeah, your memories are always the same because it always looks the same outside. So then it feels like time isn't really passing because you don't have these like markers of like winter, fall, spring, summer. And so I remember looking in the mirror once, maybe like 2.5 years in, and like my face had gotten a little older, and it like surprised me because I had felt like I had just gotten there. So I think that also plays into like the Peter Pan, like Neverland kind of vibe that is there as well. It's like people really don't feel their winters like adding up like you would in another place.
Yeah, when I think back on my time in San Francisco, I think the dominant like feeling is something like there's a sadness, like a nostalgia and a sadness, right? It's like there's something so lovely about it. Like the people I met were so creative, very open people that I still have a lot of good friends from my time there. There's a lot of creativity there. It felt good to be around creativity, even if I wasn't involved in a particular kind of creativity. But it just doesn't seem. It just the flaws of it mean that if you want to have a future, if you want to progress in your life, like you have to leave. And most of the people that are there are not from there. Like there are people that come there and then have to leave. And over just the last, I think, 4 or 5 years, I think since the Trump election, I think San Francisco got even more polarized to the left. We had Chesa Boudin, the radical communist DA, get elected, who ceased to prosecute criminals and released a lot of them that were on bail. And then over COVID, I left shortly before COVID, I guess a year before, but the city has become really depopulated, and most of my good friends that I know from there don't live there anymore. So it's this feeling that even the dream that I had when I was there is not there anymore. And that for my life to be more than a dream, I had to leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was someone tweeted photos of Market Street at 9 a.m. on like a Tuesday, like last week, and it was just vacant. Like nobody's there anymore.
And it's like, it doesn't have, I don't know if it has to be that way. I don't know if it was always that way. It's just like, it has been made completely unlivable. Like I could get into a little more like the psychic disturbances I like witnessed there in the people on the streets, like just how you have to really shut off a part of your heart to walk around that city because it's so disturbing. Like you just see people who are so upset, and those people are still there. They socially distanced them during COVID. They had like squares for homeless people to sit on, 6 feet apart.
Yeah, but you would hear like people screaming in the middle of the night, like just like demonic screaming.
And you feel for these people
who looked like they'd been living on the streets for like years. Like their hands were caked in dirt, and like their faces were caked in dirt and like weathered from the sun, and like their clothes were in tatters.
And the smell, like I still remember the smells. I remember like leaving San Francisco, landing in DC, and being like, it actually smells. It not only doesn't smell bad here, it smells good.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't even realize how much like odor I'd been in.
Yeah.
Like I had just got accustomed to it, but it's like urine and puke and like all sorts of disgusting things. So it's hard to like, I mean, you can describe it, but like seeing it's just burned into my memory.
And it really, I don't know, I just think it's a really important warning of how things can go wrong, especially like a couple years ago when Austin like legalized urban camping, and I remember reading that and being like, oh no, like that's a lot of what caused San Francisco to become unsafe for women and men too, but you know, particularly women who are smaller. And
yeah, I mean, I definitely had times when I felt unsafe in San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, but I'm a big man that knows jiu-jitsu, or an average sized man that knows jiu-jitsu. I know that like I'm not an easy target.
Yeah.
I might be a target sometimes. Like I've heard of men being robbed or killed in San Francisco too. But, you know, not their first choice most likely. But if I was a woman, I can't imagine like how you guys like went home at night, got home from, I know you never lived in the same apartment, so I don't know how you got home from each other's houses. Or
I was always scared.
I would like walk her to the bus stop and like stand there with her, and then I'd like, or if you were getting a lift, I would like follow it like on my phone because you could follow someone's ride, and I would be like so nervous.
She would watch my like location tracker like to make sure I got home, and there were just so many stories. Like my friend was on a bike, like a moped or something, at a stop sign, and some homeless guy punched her in the side of the head, like cracked her earbuds and stole her bike, and she like chased him. She's braver than I would be, but she chased him screaming, and some guys like got the bike back for her. But like you just heard about these things, and then that informs how afraid you are walking around as well, because everyone had stories, and someone threw something like oily and wet in your friend's face, and she didn't know what
Somebody
it was.
threw a cigarette in my face when I was walking down Market Street. He had no idea what he had done, and then some other guy started yelling at him, and then I had my phone stolen multiple times. People would go into bars with a flashlight and look in bags, and then all of a sudden your phone's gone.
Yeah.
Right? And they'd be like organized. There are organized crime rings in that city as well. Like, and we're seeing the media start to focus on this a little bit, which I think is good, but this has been happening for way longer than since like the media is just catching on that they need to report on this. But there are organized rings of people who will get together and like target different stores, and they go in and they start taking merchandise off the shelves
and calculating how much it costs as they do it. Aren't they like adding? Because it's legal to steal up to $900 of merchandise.
It's not legal. It's a misdemeanor.
Oh, it's a misdemeanor. So it's like a slap on the wrist, right?
And in general, the cops just aren't going to show up and arrest you.
Yeah.
Like,
No.
They've been instructed to focus on other crimes.
Yeah.
And I interacted with the cops in that city, and I actually was surprised. They're actually very like masculine, patriarchal. I could kind of assume they had kids. They seemed like family men. Like I think the job pays pretty well, and they seemed like pretty good guys. But they were telling me, because I had an incident I had to deal with, of course, that I won't get into, but a roommate dispute, and they were saying like they always wanted to do more, and they just were held back by the politicians. Like they just can't. So it's kind of like they do have people who would help and want to make it a nice place, and they just
The policies don't allow
policies
them
won't allow them to do it.
And really, like when I think, does it have to be this way? Like the way it is comes out of the ideology of the people, right?
Yep.
Ultimately, like Chesa Boudin had to win 51% or more of an election to become the DA, promising not to prosecute crime. And there's a recall election going on for him now, and if he stays in office, it's because the people there chose to do that. And I think everyone suffers when they're there, which is why so many people have left, which is why so many people come to Austin and Denver and New York, and they flee Asheville. Like they're suffering when they're there, and they feel that. But the problem is, I think we're like just sort of bifurcated between like our minds and our experience. Like we're online, and these far left ideologies sound good. Like they sound compassionate. They win you points. If you speak from the left, you can bully people and you can get them canceled, and you can feel righteous and powerful. But San Francisco is like the embodiment of what happens when you follow those politics to their conclusion, and it makes it unlivable. It makes people want to flee. So there's this like deep tension between like the actions of people fleeing San Francisco and the fact that they keep on voting for the same policies. So I think as long as it's kind of a spiritual problem, and like fighting like changing San Francisco, you'd have to change the mentality of the people there. And you hope there's a pendulum effect, right, where people suffer long enough and they come back, and maybe you wind up somewhere in a middle ground that's livable. But I don't know that I see it with like the national media and social media like encouraging this kind of madness that you see so much.
And I'm worried about it because it's being exported like around the country, right? The same ideas, the same like foundational ideas about like what it means to be a human or a man or a woman or whatever are being exported and pumped through the national media.
I had this experience very clearly when a friend of a friend from Oakland moved to Austin while I was here, and she said back in her old neighborhood in Oakland, which is across the bay from San Francisco and is more violent, there was gunshots, and she's pregnant, and she didn't want to live there anymore. She's happy to be in Austin. But she was saying that she completely supported BLM, defunding the police, all this stuff was really in favor of defunding the Austin police. I'm like, do you realize that you're the problem?
Yeah.
You're your own problem.
And that's why people in Texas and these other southern states like Florida that are getting an influx of people from blue states are rightfully concerned, because it's like, did you learn your lesson? Are you going to come here and vote for the same things or spread the same ideas that destroyed your state or your city? Or have you learned your lesson? Have you had an inner, have you done the inner like spiritual work to really understand like what went wrong there and why you felt unsafe? And because I had an entire transformation living in San Francisco where I had to confront a lot of my ideas and realize that my beliefs about the world and about men and women and the role of men and women in society were really off, and that was manifesting through all this other disorder.
But it takes humility and curiosity to do what you did. And I don't know, people are kind of prideful, and so I don't know if they have the humility to be like, wait, am I part of the problem? Like, is the way that I think part of what is making this place like dangerous and unlivable? But that is a hard pill to swallow, and it takes a lot of self-humbling to ask yourself that question. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I met. I don't know. I don't know if everyone has that experience, that inner transformation. Like for us, it did.
Self-reflective awareness you have to have. Right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a very hard thing to do. If San Francisco sort of feels like a spiritual battleground where you either get like driven down and it often felt like you're like a couple of decisions or missteps away from like actually being on the streets, right? Like that line is really thin, and or
That because the rents are so high.
yeah, but I mean that almost more in like a spiritual way as well.
The veil is really thin there.
Yeah.
I can't explain it.
Like you either come out of there like kind of, well, I would hope you'd either come out of there like more aware and like more orderly inside and in your thinking and seeing the reality of the world and how idealistic ideas that sound good don't always play out in like, empirical reality, right? Or you get like driven down and kind of stuck, and
it's some sort of like spiritual training ground or like battlefield there. Like like we became Christians there, but other people they fall down the rabbit hole more and more, and I don't know. It just seems like it kind of pushes you like one way or the other.
Yeah, like they're even like you mentioned like BLM and stuff. It's like some people like Antifa is very present in the Bay Area, right? And like so they've followed this ideological thread all the way to a place where they now believe it's right to destroy. Right, to destroy things people have built, to destroy certain structures of society that we have in America, to destroy concepts like private property and hierarchical governance and all of these and traditional families and things like that. And like that's where that's led. And you can see that in the fiery buildings that, you know, the things that go up in flames whenever they're really ignited. And I mean, like the people are ignited. And so
and you can see it in the fact that like in San Francisco, gay people get more support than straight people. Like there's no children, and it's not exactly a place that's like friendly to heterosexual couples. You know, you have to be like either poly or gay, and then we love you. But
yeah,
so like that's another kind of odd thing.
Yeah, because if it was family friendly, it would be like
full of kids.
So much would be different. Like when you're thinking long term and thinking about how to raise like virtuous children or to keep children safe, a lot of things would not be able to happen that happened in that city. Like it would just be so inappropriate.
You'd want to clean up the streets,
needles on the ground.
You wouldn't want people like flogging
naked.
each other in public. Like they have these like very kinky like street festivals that are absolutely terrible for children to see.
And I have. A friend said, like, you do need in a society like containers for vice, like Las Vegas, right?
Maybe San Francisco is like the R-rated movie that you don't take your kids to.
Yeah,
it's just kind of sad because it's in the
most beautiful place.
And it's chased away all the people that people did raise families there in the past.
Yeah,
and it's sort of just become too extreme, and a lot of that's the crime. Like even like the culture is not very family friendly either, but. Like, I don't know. When you add in the crime, like, you just can't.
Yeah. It took me a while to notice the patterns, right? Like I lived there for 6 years, and I remember just one day reflecting on my experiences and being like, I have experienced a lot of crime.
We're a little slow.
Yeah. And just like,
late bloomers.
Wait a minute, this isn't normal.
Yeah.
Like, but I had to like add it up and like put it together, and now it's obvious. But...
So we have about 5 minutes left. Just real quick, what's your favorite spot to hang out in San Francisco during the day?
Golden Gate Park.
During the day, yeah.
So Golden Gate Park, favorite part of Golden Gate Park?
Ooh.
The Conservatory of Flowers.
Yeah, near yes.
Yeah.
Near, where is that? Like near the Richmond, like out that way.
Or the
Conservatory of Flowers and all the woods behind there is like very, very mystical.
Or the music concourse. With the fountain, and it was so beautiful. That's where our favorite statue was. That they
had a
tore
beautiful
down.
Christian statue there that BLM pulled down.
Sarah.
Yeah, that's a whole other story.
My favorite is probably Strawberry Hill in Golden Gate Park, where they have butterflies fly up there to mate in the summer.
Oh, I never went there.
And you can see it's in the middle of the lake of Stowe Lake, and you can see a lot of the city.
Stowe Lake's beautiful, and I really also liked Land's End. I took a lot of friends to Land's End to trek along the coast. That place is beautiful.
You know what else is fun is taking a jump. I think they're now called Lime Bike across the Golden Gate Bridge in the day on a sunny day.
Great biking city. There are a lot of things people could learn about urban development from San Francisco. I will say that.
Favorite nighttime spot?
The Kava Lounge.
Kava Lounge. We like that place. You can drink tea.
Oh my gosh, I can't. Well, I guess I'm going to be. I have to follow on and saying me too. The Kava Lounge
we loved it.
Is great because you can hang out without drinking alcohol, without being around drunk people, and with a nice vibe.
It
Yeah.
felt like someone's living
And
room.
it has a porch.
There's a
There's a
front
little front
porch.
porch. That's very rare in San Francisco.
Yeah.
You can sit outside on nice days and like you can smoke a joint
There
or
were
whatever.
so many things from that city that I want other people to experience and bring to their cities, right? Like places
Right.
like that, or like the bikeability, or like the attention to detail in the architecture. Austin, the new architecture going up, we need to talk about it. It's not good.
It's not
Not
good.
good.
It's not good.
A lot of boxes.
Not good.
A lot of boxes.
The best food in San Francisco.
Oh,
A kitchen story.
oh, that was
They
good.
had they have like chocolate covered bacon.
Something that immediately came to mind was Turtle Tower, which is pho.
I gotta say, 4505.
Oh yeah,
Barbecue.
Barbecue and burgers,
Yeah.
really great. Fries fried in beef tallow, outstanding.
yeah. Oh no, Tenroku Sushi is my number one place. I can't believe I even forgot. That is the best sushi I've ever had anywhere. It's in the Japantown Mall,
And it goes
it's
past on little
amazing.
boats.
Yeah, not the boats, but the little conveyor belt.
Yeah.
yeah, it's nice. Lot to love about that city, and a lot to
Hate.
HAIGHT.
Hate. Yeah, love and hate.
Love and hate.
They were so right with that. I was like, yes.
yeah.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about Hate Street, and there's a lot.
I know. I feel like we need a whole nother episode to reminisce. I mean, when you've lived there for a while, you do reminisce, right? It leaves a mark on you that never goes away. Some good, some bad. It's a very polarizing place, and I hope it stays there and not everywhere else.
Yeah, we're,
Yes.
we're rooting for Austin to
Don't make
not-
the same
not
mistakes.
Make the same mistake.
Yeah.
All right. Any last words? We have like 60 seconds.
Yeah.
No, I hope we warned everyone well in this episode about how bad
A
south the city
leftist
can
society.
go. What a dystopia is like.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic that maybe it could get a little better with the COVID restrictions easing up, and there's a lot of like EMB activists and like anti-crime activists. If they recall Chesa, I think there's a future, maybe not for me because I want to raise a family, but for young people to go back and make something of themselves in their 20s again. But right now it seems like definitely at a low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right, let's call it there.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Jacob.
being with me. Bye.